Alright, so this DC character history episode is going to be all about Spectre. And Spectre is by far one of the most powerful characters in the DC universe. He has all the powers that a god would have and more. Spectre is the divine spirit of vengeance, but is limited to funneling its power through the host of a human. There have been 3 people in DC history to take the mantle of Spectre. The first and most popular being James Corrigan, the second being Green Lantern's Hal Jordan, and the third was Crispus Allen. We will find out why Hal Jordan and Crispus Allen became Spectre, but James Corrigan will have the most story to tell. Now, a little bit of character data before we get into some of the stories. Spectre first debuted in More Fun Comics number 52, which came out in February of 1940. His real name is James Corrigan. He is based out of New York City. He is 6'1". He weighs 184 pounds. His eyes are colored blue. His hair is colored red. His powers and abilities are manipulation of time and space, control over matter and energy, invulnerability, limitless strength, reality alteration, etc. Like, there's just so much he can do. Some of his enemies are Wotan, Calypso, Asdamas, and his affiliations are Gotham City Police Department, New York City Police Department, Batman, and a team called the Detailed Task Force. Now, once again, keep in mind that Spectre has been different hosts over time, so those specific hosts have had their own enemies and affiliations as well. So, in the Bronze Age of DC Comics, James Corrigan was a hard-boiled detective who was meeting with his fiancée Clarice and going to their engagement party. On their way to the event, James was attacked by 2 thugs and was stuffed into a barrel. Not only was the barrel containing James, but it was also filled with cement and then thrown into a river. Dropping to the bottom, James ultimately drowned and his spirit entered a limbo state where he met Spectre. Combining James' body and the spirit of Spectre, they vowed to confront and stop evil wherever it may be found. Corrigan did find and exact vengeance on the criminals who killed him in the first place. Then James Corrigan, or the new Spectre, got involved in World War II. Spectre was vital in keeping Great Britain from being overrun by German occupation. Dr. Fate also vouched for Spectre and his abilities, which allowed him to be one of the founding members of the Justice Society of America. Adolf Hitler came into possession of the Spear of Destiny, which created a sphere around Axis-controlled Europe. Any metahuman that entered the sphere would ultimately fall under the influence of Hitler. And Spectre knew where the spear was, but could not enter because he himself would fall under Hitler's rule. So during the last days of the war, Hitler tried to use the spear to invoke Ragnarok, but he couldn't do it because of his lack of magical energy. By the time the war ended, the spear eventually came down, which allowed superhuman beings to enter. When Spectre arrived, he discovered the monstrosities that Germany inflicted onto others, and when he found out about the concentration camps, he was completely outraged. Members of the Justice League had to restrain him and calm him down, fearing that Spectre would actually destroy all of Germany. So, by seeing that, it darkened Spectre's view of life. He continued his work of vengeance until he soon after vanished without a trace. So moving to the Silver Age, in the 50s and 60s, Spectre was only shown in comic books a handful of times. It was during this time that they decided to make Spectre more godlike, much more powerful, and almost impossible, if not literally impossible, to defeat. It wasn't until 1967 when he was given his own ongoing series, and 1968 when he teamed up with Batman in a 10-issue series. James Corrigan continued to live his life as a detective and without Spectre. It has been 20 years since he last had contact with the spirit. Corrigan eventually finds out that Spectre was indeed stuck in his body without any indications due to the spell of a demon named Asmodeus. Spectre did eventually defeat Asmodeus, which allowed James and Spectre to come together again and spread their vengeance to evildoers. The Presence, which is essentially God, soon after decided to take Spectre away from Corrigan. Doing so resulted in Corrigan's death, which required Presence to send Spectre back to him. Although Spectre's comic book series during the Silver Age didn't last all that long, considering his stories were hard to relate to. He was basically an omnipotent being that was solving problems on a human level. It was hard to find meaningful stories with a character that big and that powerful. And then over in the Bronze Age, Spectre struggled to find his footing in DC once again. During the Bronze Age, Spectre returned in Adventure Comics. The people at DC couldn't get on the same page, as some people thought that this Spectre was from Earth-2, inhabiting the body of James Corrigan from Earth-1, while others said that this was in fact both the Spectre and Corrigan from Earth-1. The confusion did not help Spectre's case in getting his own comic book series. And with the revival of the character, he was to be much more violent and gruesome than before. Spectre was planned to have his own series multiple times throughout the years, and it never panned out. Instead, he was reduced to a guest appearance who would be featured briefly in other comics with other heroes. Now, during the modern age is when Spectre made a wider and much more successful return. His ongoing series was written by writer John Ostrander, who made the character of Spectre more complex. Instead of Spectre simply being the spirit of vengeance, he was now thrown into situations with ethical questioning and problem solving. So for example, what type of person, mentality, or crime justifies the purification of his vengeful spirit? This made the character more relatable. It is later revealed through Spectre's story that he was originally intended to be the wrath of God. Spectre took his role alongside Lucifer when he rebelled, but he quickly asked for forgiveness, and Spectre's penance was to become the wrath of God. Now, God, or Presence as they call him, had a previous angel who was the wrath of God and the spirit of vengeance. His name was Eclipso, and he eventually turned against God, which left Spectre an opening to replace him. So essentially, Spectre becomes the embodiment of vengeance, while Eclipso became the embodiment of revenge. Spectre and Eclipso have fought many times over history, and where there have been winners of battle, neither of them can be fully destroyed. Spectre also played an important role in Infinite Crisis. The Anti-Monitor, who is the being that has dedicated himself to destroying the entire multiverse. In order to stop that from happening, Spectre returned to the beginning of time to fight Anti-Monitor one-on-one. Anti-Monitor's plan to destroy the multiverse was at hand, and Spectre needed to buy time for the rest of the Justice League and other heroes to create a plan of their own to stop it from happening. Spectre was absolutely powerful enough to fight Anti-Monitor alone, but ultimately he failed to stop him. The ultimate collapse of the multiverse went into effect, but they managed to keep one Earth and one universe in creation. And as you know, this created the new continuity. In this new continuity, Spectre's powers would be stripped after the failure of stopping Anti-Monitor. He would remain within James Corrigan, and it was possible for Spectre to depart James and have a separate entity, although within 48 hours, if he did not return, James would die. So in this new ungodly state, if you will, Spectre and Corrigan started to investigate murders caused by the cult of the Blood Red Moon. This cult was seeking to kill a powerless Spectre, but they failed and went into hiding. But not for long. Soon after, they encountered Wotan, who happens to be a villain of Dr. Fate. Wotan is a prehistorical female sorcerer. Wotan at the time was stuck in limbo trying to recover a new body to come back to the real world. Wotan started stealing the limbs of the popular mage known as Zatanna. Spectre learned of this and recovered Zatanna's body and bargained for Wotan's freedom. When Wotan's soul was released from the afterlife, Spectre turned on Wotan knowing she couldn't be trusted. Spectre failed to capture Wotan, which prompted Spectre to seek out some help. Spectre sought out another sorcerer, Madame Xanadu. The two developed a relationship and had consciousness intercourse. So basically mind sex. Doing this actually helped Spectre slowly gain his lost power over time. This is when the cult of the Blood Red Moon made a strike again, but this time against Madame Xanadu. Attacking Xanadu would diminish Spectre's powers so the cult could kill him once and for all. But with the help from Corrigan, they stopped that from happening. After many battles against supernatural beings, Spectre had taken over Corrigan's complete existence for a time in order to catch up on their quest of vengeance. Corrigan had to abandon all of his duties in that time. On one of the missions, Spectre's actions resulted in the death of an innocent man, and since Spectre has shared Corrigan's body for so long, he started to understand the feelings and remorse of a human being. Corrigan also fell in love with a woman named Amy Biderman. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. She actually helped Spectre become more humanized over time as well. And during this time, things got escalated even further. The demon Asmodeus returned from hell, and Madame Xanadu learned of Spectre and Corrigan's whereabouts. After Xanadu and Spectre's relationship, if you want to call it, after it didn't work out, Xanadu had her own agenda with the spirit of vengeance. She forced herself upon Corrigan and Spectre and shortly became Madame Spectre. This did not last long as Spectre's power is far too much for Xanadu to handle. Oddly enough, that experience made Spectre appreciate Corrigan's love and attachment for Amy even more. Now, with the return of Asmodeus, he orchestrated the death of Amy. So protecting Amy would have been really easy, but when Asmodeus revealed himself to Spectre, that distracted him. And as the distraction of their fight worked in Asmodeus' favor, Amy was unprotected and fell to the murder that Asmodeus planned. Soon after, Spectre fought Asmodeus for the final time, and Spectre was capable of separating the demon Asmodeus from the host he was residing in, allowing the host to pass into reincarnation and the demon Asmodeus to die. After all of this and more, Corrigan grew tired of the rage that kept them going. He decided to relinquish his role as Spectre and pass into the heavens, with Spectre returning to the Spectre Force from where he came. Now, a little bit of detail on how Hal Jordan became Spectre. The ruler of Hell unleashed all of its forces on Earth, and Spectre needed help stopping this threat. James Corrigan was visited by mystics in heaven and was asked to return with the Spectre, but he refused, claiming he has finally found peace, and you can't really blame the guy. Spectre instead sought out Hal Jordan, who was at the time Parallax. If you don't know what Parallax is, essentially it is the embodiment of fear and complete immortality. Depending on the host, their power is limitless, and with Hal Jordan as Green Lantern becoming Parallax, he had so much power he could destroy and recreate the entire multiverse. So without Hal knowing the full picture, Spectre chose him as a host in hopes of not only stopping the threat from Hell, but also cleansing Parallax from Hal's soul. Parallax, being unbelievably powerful, eventually tried to dominate not just Hal completely, but Spectre as well. And with the help from Spectre, Hal was capable of removing Parallax from his body and fighting him off. After this was done, Spectre returned back to the presence and awaited a new host. Then over to the third person who has been hosted by Spectre, Crispus Allen. Just makes me want to say Crispers, to be honest with you. Crispus Allen was a detective in the Gotham City Police Department and was murdered. Spectre confronted him as a ghost at his own funeral and offered to create a bond with one another. Crispus said no, and Spectre gave him a year to reconsider. And after that year passed, Crispus accepted and bonded with Spectre. Their first task, however, was to exact vengeance on Crispus Allen's son. Yeah, I know, pretty twisted. His son happened to murder the man who murdered Crispus himself. And to make things even weirder, the man who killed Crispus was another GCPD detective named James Corrigan. And there is no relation to the original James Corrigan. That's not confusing at all, am I right? So when exacting justice or vengeance on Crispus's son, they made sure to end his son's life peacefully, but Crispus was not happy with this at all, and his son definitely did not deserve that. So in the New 52, when things got changed again, remember James Corrigan? No, not that one. The one who killed Crispus Allen? Yeah, him. Well, in New 52, he became the new Spectre. James Corrigan's fiancée was being held captive in a warehouse. Turns out when James got there, it was a trap, and he and his fiancée are murdered by the kidnappers. Spectre then intervenes and uses him as the new host. Spectre then joins the Detailed Task Force, which is a police precinct dedicated to solving supernatural mysteries. And then in DC Rebirth, that quickly changed some of the continuity soon after New 52, they rewrote the origin story to reflect the original story from the Golden Age. So James Corrigan came from a family who usually served in the police, which made him want to be a cop himself. Corrigan joined the NYPD, but was one day attacked by criminals and drowned in a river. Spectre then bonded them together to enact justice on his killers. There are some stories about Spectre in the New 52 and Rebirth continuity, but not as many as you would think. Most of his content does come from the modern age. And once again, let's get into some Elseworlds content, and do keep in mind, Elseworlds is not technically canon. They are just stories about characters taken from other dimensions. In a fantastic story, and honestly one of my personal favorites, called Kingdom Come, a possible apocalyptic event may fall upon the DC universe. The Spectre in this book is indeed James Corrigan, but he is a human soul given angelic type powers from God. He takes a small-time preacher by the name Norman McKay and brings him through future events to see who would be responsible for this apocalypse. Spectre admits that his powers are not what they once were and needs an outside perspective to judge accordingly. Throughout the story, Norman McKay reminds him of his humanity and to see things through the eyes of the man he once was, and in doing so, James Corrigan realizes no one is to blame. Then another small story from Tangent Comics, which was a smaller publication from DC that made one-off type stories. They made a story about Spectre, who was a boy named Taylor Pike and happened to be a genius. He exposed himself to neutrino energy, which made him completely intangible. He used these abilities to remain a thief. And last but not least, in 2008, a multiverse event showed the Spectre of Earth 3, and he happened to be evil and a member of the Crime Society of America. Now, there you have it. There is some backstory and summarization of who the character of Spectre truly is. Now, I just want to remind you guys once again, there is so much story out there for someone like Spectre. especially in the modern age. I can tell you right now, my modern age section could have been 3 times longer than it actually was, but I didn't want to make this video all too long. So if you are interested in Spectre more, if this video did maybe pique your interest in his character, go out on Google, research him, maybe even read some of his comic books online, because he does have some interesting characters and a lot of tie-ins with characters like Batman and Superman and so many others. Now, like usual guys, if you did like this video, please leave a like, and if you aren't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe if you want to keep up with future content like this and future content of all of mine in general. And like always, until next time, I will talk to you all very soon.